Welcome to the Fighting on Film podcast, the podcast all about classic and obscure war movies, from the Normandy landings to the days of chivalry and swords. If it's been captured on film, we're going to try and cover it. I'm Robbie of RM Military History.
I'm Matthew Moss of Historical Firearms and the Armourer's Bench.
Welcome back to Fighting on Film, everybody. Last week we were talking about nuclear wastelands and Britain's ill-preparedness for a nuclear war. But this week we're back in our ballpark, a little bit safer territory, shall we say, with Panfilov's 28 Men, which is a Russian war film. It's our first foreign language feature as well. The movie's completely in Russian, so we had to decipher badly translated subtitles on YouTube when we watched it. It's a fantastic film.
Came out in 2016. It's about 105 minutes long, and it tells the story of a platoon, or the remnants of a company, of the 316th Rifle Division during the Battle of Moscow in November 1941. It basically follows these 28 men as they hold off the German hordes. They
hold off like a whole motorized German detachment. You know, there's panzers and infantry that are coming onto Moscow. So the issue is with this film, Matt, this week, that there's no real standout actors. They all seem to be jobbing like Russian actors.
Yeah, they're all very competent.
Yeah. But there's no standout big star that I could find like to pin the movie on. It's a really interesting movie.
Not even for in Russian terms. So they're not really well known in Russia either.
Well, I wouldn't say that, but I had a look. But there's a lot of guys who've done maybe like Russian TV serials, Russian war movies as well. As a lot of crossover there, but there's no to Western audiences. There's no true standout. There's no one who's appeared in, say, like Vikings on Amazon or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So the production, we'll quickly get through it because it's a really interesting production. So the movie's crowdfunded back in 2016. They had like partners with the film, so it was like the Russian Historical Society were helping out. Like a massive helper of the movie was the video game company Gaijin Entertainment. Gaijin, I'm probably pronouncing that wrong.
The War Thunder developers, isn't it? Yeah, the
War Thunder guys, and they just released the Enlisted game that you see adverts for on YouTube before every video.
Yeah, they're constant, aren't they?
So they helped out. It's directed by a duo of two men called Kim. I'm going to murder these Russian names this week. Apologies for any Russian listeners. Kim Druzinin and Andrei Shalopa. And Andrei also wrote the film too. And it had a budget of $1.7 million in dollars. That's roughly about 1.2 million pounds. And it made $6.4 million dollars back. That's about 3.6 million in pounds.
That's amazing that this was made for under 2 mil.
It's crazy, isn't it? It looks fantastic. And that's about 385 million rubles.
I think I read that they had some input from the Kazakh government because the division was actually a Kazakh division. And I think they also had some funding, like a million rubles or more from the Russian government as well. The Ministry of Culture, I think it was.
That's it, yeah. And a lot of they had a Kickstarter campaign, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Like 35,000 people supported it, something
that's crazy,
amazing like that. Like really big numbers. It's a testament to the story of the 28 men and that legend around the war. That people were like, oh, I'd love to see a movie of this. Yeah. I suppose it's the same sort of thing like with us, and we're like, oh, I'd love to see a film about Imjin.
Yeah, exactly. This is what we talked about a few weeks ago. If a movie like this can be made crowdfunded and crowdsourced sort of thing, then why can't Western filmmakers do more of this sort of thing?
For under 2-3 million pounds. Yeah, that's, come on.
It's crazy what they actually achieve. So also another thing about the movie that is really interesting to me and Matt this week is that this movie has really minimal CGI. It's not like something
practical effects.
Yeah, practical effects. So it's not like the absolute horror fest that was D-Day, the Battle of Omaha, with Nicolas Cage's son that we keep mentioning on our Twitter and on, Mary Buckman, a listener. She recoils in horror whenever that movie is mentioned.
Mary.
Yeah,
Just dipped into it.
yeah.
Ugh.
Oh gosh. So unlike that movie that just relies heavily on really bad stock animations, this movie just goes for mostly in-camera effects, and it pulls it off fantastically.
So they did 116-inch models in a studio. They did on-location filming in the field.
Mm-hmm.
And they did some filming with one-to-one scale models. And there's some great photos online. You can find them really easily.
Mm.
You can see where they've positioned them. And so the actors have something real to interact with, which I think is really important.
Mm.
In post-production, they took it all and laid it up in post-production rather than it just being simply CGI. And I think when we watched it, like, we only noticed one really janky bit, didn't we? With those German soldiers' legs disappearing.
Oh yeah, there's a bit where there's an overhead shot, and it looks great. You know, they've got like loads of Panzer threes and fours going towards this trench system.
Loads of guys marching forward as well.
On the outskirts of it, there's some guys that clip into the floor, just the legs in the floor. It's not that bad because they're in snow.
There was no one running into a tree, so that's
no, there's no one trying to find the underwater level. But yeah, I mean, it looks great, you know. And they built a whole 1/1 scale Panzer IV, which you can't knock them for, and it looks fantastic.
When I stumbled across this film about a couple of months ago, and I skipped through it, it's like, because I assumed it was going to be like just any normal sort of like hyper Russian, very glossy, quite almost, you know, beyond belief.
Everyone's running at machine gun positions going, "Hurrah for the motherland!"
Exactly, and it's you know, it's that trope of what Russian war cinema has sort of become, where it's like heavy on CGI, heavy on rhetoric, and then, you know, you get these battles that are not really believable.
Yeah.
So I thought, I'll skip through it, I'll see what it's like. Watched it. And I was really impressed. I thought, that's actually quite good. Like, the cinematography in this is really beautiful. You know, the actors aren't, you know, they aren't doing anything outlandish. You know, they're quite competent. It's nicely shot. The CGI, I didn't even know about the models at that point. I thought, and the CGI is remarkably good. So I was like, Robbie, we need to like take a look at this, because this is a really like good example of Russian war movie making. Like, this is for a modern Russian war movie, this is like pretty impressive.
Yeah, I mean, even for a modern war film, it's really impressive. You know,
I suppose it's partially because it's not on this huge scale where it's like showing thousands of men like taking, you know, pushing the backwards and forwards in Stalingrad and stuff, you know.
Yeah, the origin of the story that they use to make the movie that they adapt is like it's good in its own right, sort of thing. So it's a bit more of a boy's own tale. But yeah, it's just a really well shot, really tidy, neat little war film that doesn't, you know, it's quite rare these days. It doesn't preoccupy itself with a secondary plot. It's a little bit like 50s style war films where it's just about the guys, you know.
It's you know, it's men in battle sort of stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a little bit like Battleground. It's a little bit like Sea of Sand or something like that, you know, where it's the guys on a mission and this is what they're doing. There's no deviation from that.
And it's a Last Stand movie too.
And it's another Last Stand movie. We bloody love Last Stand movies on the pod. I think we've done more of those than we have anything else. Plot. I've written a little synopsis here. So it's 28 men from the 316th Rifle Division under the command of General Panfilov stop a German force of 54 tanks and infantry advancing on Moscow in November 1941. And it's originally adapted from a report from the Red Army paper called the Krasnaya Zvezda.
Oh, well done. I wasn't going to attempt that, but that was nicely done.
I used to reenact Russian Red Army for a little bit, so I'm Zvezda, I know. That's the only one I'm pretty sure on. But apparently the accuracy is disputed, and you were looking into this, Matt. So I'm really interested to see what you found.
The story behind the actual tale of the 28 men is almost as interesting as like the film and the story itself. The story is that this under-strength company of the 316th Rifle Division held back 3 German battalions, armored battalions. The story goes that these men were, you know, fought to the last man. They all died. That's not what happens in the film, which is interesting, and we'll come back to that. So there was a Red Army newspaper journalist called Vasily Korotiv, and he wrote the first article, and he wrote it about 28 men that had fought in a battle within the Battle of Moscow.
Right.
So, you know, all the Red Army journalists are writing, you know, patriotic stories about how the Red Army is holding the Germans back from Moscow. And it's, you know, it's the big climactic struggle for the motherland.
Yeah.
Korotiv basically writes this story based on an account from the 316th Rifle Division's commissar.
Okay.
And he recounts the story of a group of men from the division that held off over 50 tanks and killed a lot of Germans, but were killed to a man. And the article gets published as Panfilov's Guardsmen in the Battle for Moscow. And it claims 18 tanks killed, but there's no mention of the 28 men. It doesn't specify how many, or it doesn't specify where they were. And then there was another Red Army newspaper journalist, Alexander Krivitsky, who wrote a follow-up piece called, I think it's the 28 Fallen Heroes. And it takes the original story from Korotiv and it adds more detail. So it takes on another layer. He writes about 28 men from the 4th Company of the 1075th Regiment, 2nd Battalion, which was part of the 316th. He elaborates a little bit more. He mentions the company commissar, Diev, but then everyone wants to know more.
Okay.
So they want to know more detail because the story is gaining traction. The Soviet leadership likes it. Stalin likes it. They want to know the men. They want to find out who the men were.
It's snowballing, isn't it? It's all
is.
Yeah.
So Krivitsky goes to the front and he talks to the commissar of the 316th, but he can't find out who these men are, and he can't find a commissar called Diev either. Now it turns out that Diev was a nickname, very convenient, for another commissar, who is the commissar that's portrayed in the film as leading the 28 men.
I got you.
And what happens is they basically take the names from men that had died around that period. They take 28 names of men that had died in the week around the battle, and they cherry pick who is going to be those 28 men. So they get made heroes of the Soviet Union.
Of course, yeah.
And the story just takes on this sort of mythical, legendary sort of...
It's like a talisman for Russian defense, something like that.
Exactly. It's, it's that bleak point in the war where the Russian army's being pushed back. They're almost backs to the wall at Moscow.
Yep.
They need these big patriotic stories. It's the Great Patriotic War. And this story has become one of those sort of like foundation stories of, of the Russian understanding and, mindset for the war. And then it turns out that out of the 28 men they picked, not all of them were dead.
Okay.
Half a dozen of them turn out to have survived the battle.
Oh, wow.
It turns out that some of the people named deserted.
Oh.
And it becomes a bit of a scandal, and it's all covered up.
Oh, wow.
I'm not an expert on this, and I would, encourage anyone to go and look into this and read into it because it's really interesting.
Yeah.
I've just read, various sources on the internet, Russian and English, whatever I could find. And, I'm sure there's a pretty good book written about this somewhere.
This is not, there should be.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. But it's really interesting. It becomes this huge thing. And, to the point where there's giant statues erected on the battlefield.
At the end of the film, they pan out to it, don't they?
They do.
Yeah.
And over the credits, you have another monument in Almaty in Kazakhstan that is, it's Panfilov's men.
Yeah.
And it's, it's all become a key part of the mythology surrounding, the Red Army's fight against, the Germans in 41.
Because this is why this film is sort of an anomaly in that space of all these straight to DVD over here. I mean, I know in Russia they get cinema releases, but you get all these sort of rousing patriotic feather movies where everyone's shouting hurrah and running at MG42 positions, and everyone's like, for Stalin, for the motherland, or sort of how in I know we tried to make a pact that we weren't going to mention it, but kind of how in Enemy at the Gates, all the Russians are portrayed as this sort of card-carrying Stalinites, but yet in this movie, not really. They barely mention the regime or communism at all. It might be mentioned. It's mentioned in a sort of way that me and you thought it's mentioned in a way that people would actually talk about it.
Yeah.
Rather than going, oh, the Comintern have just done this. How good's that, comrade?
Exactly.
It's more about, oh, did you hear that, bread is being made now? Or did you hear about this?
Yeah. And that's another interesting thing about the film, is the way that the actual bulletins or the Russian newspaper that I can't pronounce.
The Kranzya Zvezda.
That's the one. Is portrayed. So there's a bit where the commissar, the company commissar, is sat down and he's reading from the September bulletin. And, one of the men jokes that, of course I've heard this story. That bulletin's from 2 months ago.
Yeah.
And you shouldn't believe everything you hear in the bulletin. Because it's talking about these patriotic actions where, a guy took out a German machine gun position with a grenade, and then he fought off a platoon of Germans and then killed himself with his last grenade.
Yep.
It's these sort of almost not really believable sort of propaganda stories that definitely appeared in Russian propaganda newspapers and the Red Army newspapers. It's interesting that the film is, understands where its legend that it's based on has come from, and is kind of doing these little sly nods. The men at the front line probably didn't, they probably liked the stories, but they probably didn't believe them completely.
I mean, if you're on the receiving end of a German attack, you know how it is. If you read something that doesn't ring true in the army paper,
yeah,
you're not gonna, it's not gonna be real. But then the guy behind the lines or the guy in the trenches 2 miles away from you might not have had it as bad. So then he believes it. Then it's all about reinforcing that it can do attitude, I guess. But interesting enough, we talk about the things not ringing true and maybe being a little bit boy's own. So I've actually got a pamphlet called Stalingrad Fights On from 1942, and it's written by K. Simonov. It's meant to be like an account of someone who was like there, like a sort of bird's eye, fly on the wall account of the defense of Stalingrad. But it really reads like a little bit like these,
like a commando comic.
A little bit, yeah. It's like, when he stared down the Panzer with his anti-tank gun, he took it out. Men with semi-automatic rifles fired out of windows, and we beat back the fascists.
I'm sure stuff like that happened, but it's the way it's written, isn't it?
Yeah, it's always just the way it's written. You're just like, I don't know. It's not like something that, it's not like Ernie Pyle writes. It's not. It doesn't have that sort of air of authenticity,
like a Victoria Cross citation, and you're like, wow.
Yeah. Another thing about the movie, we didn't mention it before, but the Germans aren't portrayed in this movie in a way that I don't think I'd ever seen before. Where the Germans don't have, it's not like someone portraying like a big, mean, evil SS German tank commander who...
You already know that the Germans are the enemy.
Yeah.
You don't need to be shown that the Germans are evil.
Yeah, you don't need someone like Hessler to like reinforce the cartoonish sort of evilness of Germans in movies sometimes.
The portrayal of the Germans in this is really interesting because you barely see them, up close.
When you do see them, they've all got like the little, like their scarves around their faces, so they're almost dehumanized in a way.
Yes, that's a good point, actually.
There's a little review here, and I think it sums up a little bit about what we just talked about. It's from a website called film.ru, which is a little bit like IMDb. So I've translated one of the sections. There are neither special villains nor glorifications of Stalin and communism. This is a war movie about war, not politics, and the latter is manifested only in the multinationality of Panfilov's division. Formed from the regiments of Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan, on the screen, colourful Russians, Kazakhs, Ukrainians are fighting shoulder to shoulder, and the nationality is sometimes mentioned, albeit in a friendly, joking way. Heroes find excuses for gloomy humour even in the midst of battle. By the German side of the battle is not personified. The Nazis appear as a kind of zombie from a video game. They roll onto Soviet positions, the Red Army men beat them off, and so on and so forth until the end of the picture. This is war, but not a dramatic conflict, not a clash of characters, and since Soviet soldiers are depicted, in essence, as people without fear and reproach, they also have no internal conflicts.
Yeah, I'd agree with that completely.
And it ends with, it's more of a guide to professional warfare than an example of well-thought-out drama.
I think the fact that you don't see the enemy, especially not the infantry, you briefly see some German tank commanders and some tank crew up close when they're,
There's one German that has a line at the end when he's on top of his tank.
Yeah, he tells them to fall back, doesn't he, or something like that. Yeah,
No, they're just the enemy, aren't they?
I think the film is relatively 2D in that respect. It's not trying to tell us, or it's not trying to portray anything deep.
No,
it's men in combat. It's not an anti-war movie. It's not a pro-war movie. I wouldn't say.
I wouldn't say that. No,
kind of just telling the story. It's not trying to say anything too cerebral.
Yeah, I think they're not layering anything else on. I think that's what we keep coming back to, is that it doesn't feel like it's been politicized, and it doesn't feel like there's no real message. It's just watch what these guys are doing.
It's very much an action movie, I think.
Yeah, it is an action film. Maybe it doesn't have anything more to say than just that. Like, appreciate, whether the 28 men were the 28 men or not. I think at the end of the day, the movie's just trying to say, lads did this around Moscow, not just these 28 men, but
yes, yeah, that's very
hundreds of men. Appreciate what they did in the historical sense of they saved Russia or something like that. I think it does its job well.
To double back a little bit and to give a little bit of context of what they think actually happened.
Right.
So from that battalion, the 1075th, the second battalion of the 1075th Regiment, they think that 4 understrength companies were in the line. They saw action, but they probably weren't anywhere near where the stories put them.
Okay.
Near a railway junction. And it's sort of become this, honored sacred part of the Soviet law around the war.
Yeah.
To the point where I read on one of the articles, Brezhnev in the 60s said anyone that doubts the story is slandering the heroic past of, the Soviet people.
Wow.
That's
strong.
You can't, once that's been said by the premier, you can't really argue with it, can you?
Yeah, don't annoy.
That survives to today.
Wow.
Because when the film was being crowdfunded in 2015, the Russian state archivist, the director of the Russian State Archive, cited historical documents that pointed to the fact that the actual portrayal of the men in that story, in the legend, isn't necessarily completely accurate. To the point where I think he was removed from his job.
Oh wow!
And the Minister of Culture said something like, "You can't really argue with the sacred legend, and it's impossible to besmirch. And people that try to do that are total scumbags."
Wow.
Yeah. So, there's a clear line from Stalin, like in the story, through to Brezhnev, seeing it as part of the Soviet legend, and that is part of the Soviet history of the struggle of the patriotic war, through to the current sort of Russian government saying, no, this should still be revered, although we aren't a communist country anymore. It's still the great struggle of the Russian people, and the story of the 28 men is ingrained within that. It's on that sort of like fascinating bleeding edge where legend meets history.
It sits on the fence of myth and history, doesn't it? The movie finds a good balance, I think.
Yeah, and the film doesn't actually replicate the legend in totality because the 6 men at the end survive.
Yeah, of course.
And that's kind of a nod to the 6 men of the 28 they just picked to be the 28 that did survive. So it's the kind of, they've done their research.
They wink to the audience. If you know, you know, sort of thing.
Exactly. I think that's it. So I guess that brings us to the alley tally. And there's a lot this week.
It's time for Alley Tally on Fighting on Film.
There's a lot to cover this week. But for those who haven't listened before, the alley tally is where we discuss some of the cool kit and weaponry and anything really interesting that we can sort of like pick out of the film. So Rob, what have you got for this week?
I got in my notes that it's like a who's who of Russian small arms, 1941.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's all iconic, isn't it? It's all iconic Russian weaponry. So the things my little things I've picked out is, that you've got the PTRD 41 anti-tank rifle.
Yeah.
A really nice to see PPD 40, which is everyone thinks PPSH. There is one in it, but the PPD 40 is an earlier drum magazine SMG that the Russians used. And you get Mosins, there's an SVT 40 in there, there's anti-tank guns. As I said, it's like a who's who. And I liked also seeing the different Russian uniforms. So we get the Telegrika, which is if you don't know what a Telegrika is, it's the padded coat the Red Army soldiers always have. And that's called a Telegrika. But then also there's guys in like early war, 1941, grey greatcoats and hats. So it's like a nice little mix because the Russians were in this transitional period of sort of, there's some new kit and there's some old kit.
Yeah.
Guys have got stuff that they had in the 30s and early and new stuff's coming online. So the PPSH 41's in there as like a nod to sort of, this is new weaponry coming through.
And the SVT 40, brand new at the time,
You were looking at researching the weaponry in a division, in a platoon level, actually this is quite accurate because everything is represented quite well.
Yeah, so there's two PTRD 41s that are bolt action anti-tank rifles. So you get a single shot and it's a bolt action. And then there's a couple of 45mm 53K anti-tank guns, which are sort of like the small crew-served anti-tank guns on little carriages.
They're really iconic, aren't they?
They are.
They're pretty much the only anti-tank gun the Russians use, aren't they?
Yeah. Yeah, they're the light anti-tank weapon of, and at that point in the war, they definitely are the only real anti-tank gun that the Soviets have. Lots of cool stuff, like, there's a load of different grenades in there. There's RPG-40 grenades, RPG-33s. There's that really interesting couple of shots where they show them with Molotovs, and, they're talking about what the Molotovs can do.
Incendiary bottles, aren't they? That's what I think they're called. Yeah.
And they've got the grenades where they've wrapped a load of RPG-33 grenades together to make an anti-tank, like a concussion sort of thing that they can throw. But yeah, I mean, we'll talk a little bit more about this in a moment, I suppose. But
yeah, because these feed into scenes, don't they? The weaponry is very much...
Because the meat of the film, really the second two acts, are mostly just the battle.
Probably like 40 minutes odd of action in the movie, which is quite nice. Like the trench system as well. It didn't like, it wasn't overdone. It felt like they dug it like a few days previously, and that you see him digging it as well.
Yeah, and they got the camouflage net over the top. It's very, someone who's done their research on this movie, because there's a couple of shots where they show the anti-tank guns being dug in.
That's it,
and we get this really lovely sort of like overhead shot of showing the guys digging the trench.
Oh, it's beautiful.
Well, the cinematography of the film is really excellent.
Really nice. And it's way better than I thought it was going to be. Because, you weren't sure what to expect going in. And you think, hang on a minute. The staging of every shot, it feels like someone's sort of really sat down and thought about every single little bit, even down to little pieces of mise-en-scène where you've got a guy with I think it's the PPD, the guy with the PPD. He's made a little dugout in the side of the trench and put his drum mags on.
Yeah.
So it's easier for him to reload. And you've got lads who've put grenades in little areas where they obviously think they're going to engage tanks.
Yeah.
So everything's got a place. It's just really nice to see. It's like,
and that can all be pulled from manuals. That's all there. It's written into the manuals. It's in accounts of troops.
It's just really good.
It is. And they actually set up decoys as well.
Oh, yeah.
The men move into the line. They dig their trenches. Battle. That's it. And basically, it shows them digging a series of trenches in front of their position. The reconnaissance plane comes over, spots the positions, obviously notes it because that's what gets bombarded.
Yep.
But it shows the men like setting up an artillery piece, and they're covering it. It's just logs, but they're making it look like a field gun, and then they go and dig their proper positions.
And then all hell lets loose for about 40 minutes.
Yeah,
that's really good. Any other Ali?
Yeah, I think my pick is the M1910, the Maxim gun. So we get to see all these cool weapons like the Mosin-Nagant 9130s, and they have some Mosin-Nagant 38 carbines.
Yeah, they're quite rare.
Because we were watching, I thought, are they 41s? Have they got something wrong? But it turns out 44s. And I was like, oh no, 38's cool.
But it's like that little attention to detail again, because their anti-tank crews have the carbines, which is really nice. It's another little addition.
That comes, I think, from there's two museums helped a lot with this. I can't remember which two they are. It's listed. I think it's on the Wikipedia page or something like that. But two Russian military museums helped with kit and uniforms. Yep. So they were probably historical advisors as well. So I think that helped a lot when it came to the weapons and kit. So we see like DP-27s, which is really cool. You don't see those in films very often. As Rob mentioned, the PPD-40, which is the precursor, the Papa-Shah 41, which kind of like the most famous sort of iconic weapon of the Soviet
100%,
army during the war. And then we get on the flank, which is really cool. They sort of like in the scenes where they're showing preparation, they dig a little sort of machine gun pit. So the basic layout is center is like a is the infantry positions. Left flank facing the enemy is the anti-tank guns, and that's in like a kind of wooded area.
Yep.
And then on the other flank, there's a machine gun position. And then I assume on the, after the machine gun position, there's, another battalion, another company, whatever.
Reading some documents and watching some videos about the way panzers were deployed, I think those panzer commanders are going against tactic and doctrine because they're way too close to that wooded area. Because in one of the pamphlets about the panzer commanding, it's like, don't drive too close to wooded areas because they're ideal spots for ambushes and things. So it's quite interesting. But then they seem like they're bottlenecked into that position. Sort of thing.
Definitely do. Yeah.
Yeah. There's woods either side. They have to go that way.
Which I suppose is where the Soviets would have picked a position like that.
Yeah, definitely.
That's where they would have. That's the kind of position they would have picked.
Yeah.
And maybe there was no other way forward for that German company. So on the right flank there is the machine gun, and you get these really beautiful shots, close-ups. It's literally M1910 Maxim porn, because it's a two-man position. The gunner doesn't take his finger off the trigger the entire time. He's just pouring rounds down.
Yeah.
Kind of inaccurate because you don't see any steam coming off the jacket. He hasn't got Richard be absolutely livid.
Oh, Richard be is nut. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's no condenser can, there's no water in there, there's nothing. But he's like laying it down. And there's two scenes where he's key. So the first one is he scythes down the German infantry supporting the tanks, and that gives the guys in the trench time to use the PTRD 41 anti-tank rifles.
Yep.
And they would have been overrun by the infantry if they hadn't been dealt with. But the cinematography again comes in, and you get these really nice tight shots of like the cocking handle reciprocating, and the spent cases popping out the ejection tube at the front of the gun, just like pouring out, like it's like a downpour of spent cases.
It's really nice, isn't it?
It really is good, and that was one of my favorite scenes. I thought that is a nice portrayal of Maxim gun doing what a Maxim gun probably would have done in a battle like that. Yeah.
And it's nice that it's on its proper mounting, and the guy pulls it along wherever he goes. Yeah,
it's on its wheeled mount, and they sort of like lift it up onto the parapet, and then when they're not using it, they take it down off the parapet.
You even get a section of them putting on the armor plate shield in front of it, which is really nice too.
Yeah, and they kind of like discuss where they would put the armor plate. Like he sort of like talks about maybe putting it to the side, doesn't he, or something like that? It's like draw fire.
Be careful where you put that. It's a bit obvious. It's obvious what we are, or something. Yeah, we're not sure if the subs we had were good translations or not. It's only one thing that let the film down for me was like, almost didn't want to watch it with subtitles because I think you still can get the gist of it even if you don't.
Yeah, you totally can. Like it'd be good to have some proper subs. I wouldn't. I don't think I'd want it overdubbed.
No, I don't think that wouldn't work.
I find dubbed films quite distracting because I just end up watching their lips.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, and then sometimes obviously words and sentences aren't long enough, so you get like people haven't stopped talking when the dub ends, and that's always really annoying.
Yeah.
I think what you just said there about the Maxim gun transitioned perfectly into fave scenes. So Matt, fave scenes apart from the Maxim gun sections?
Okay, so actually there's one that I really liked before the battle. Okay. So there's a scene at the very beginning of the film where they're all gathered around the table in the camp, and there's an officer who's basically telling them about German tanks and German armor. And he explains how you knock out a tank. And he talks about, what's the Czech tank?
Panzer 38T.
38T, that's it. Thank you. I knew it was 38 something. I just could not remember it. So the 38Ts, and he talks about how the armor's riveted, and it's, the PTRD can punch through that no problem at 400 yards. But the Germans aren't going to lead with those. They're going to bring up the big stuff first. And they do. And so he's drawing out little sketches of them, and he's showing you where the machine guns
are. He draws like
are,
a really good stick 38T. Because
Yeah, really good. Like, I wanted to see his Mark, his Panzer IV. I wanted to see the other. Like,
so detailed.
just leave me with this guy for 10 minutes, just drawing tanks. It'd be great. Like the Bob Ross of the Soviet Army. So
Bob Rossovich.
So, and then it sort of transitions into, there's a bit of humor, which is nice. He's talking about when he brings out the Molotov cocktails, he's talking about and he's like, one of the big Russian sort of like just enlisted men like takes a bottle and he's like, I'd normally prefer cognac, that kind of thing. And he's joking about what's in the bottles. A little bit later on, there's a scene where they basically build like a mock tank to practice bombing.
That's it.
And the guys are dragging it on a sled and, they're throwing fake bombs at it. And that's just a really interesting scene, which you can totally see happening. I really enjoyed that bit. That was one of my favorite scenes. I've got a couple of others in the battle. That one was a really good one.
It was nice because it showed men being trained to do something like on the fly. So it felt like that, these were new men. You got to train them up quick. And then there's sort of even in the battle, there's an ad hoc nature to like taking out the tanks. You can tell they've been trained to do it, but there's always different circumstances. So it always changes a little bit every time.
Like, these are new. They ignite on their own.
Yeah.
So you don't have to light the, like on a Molotov, you have to light the fuse and throw it in it. When the glass breaks, that ignites the, the contents.
Which is also nice to see movies with actual incendiary bottles, not Molotov cocktails. That was nice to see. It's just something different that you don't see.
Yeah,
very
it's
often.
that level of attention to detail that's really good about this film.
Yeah, yeah.
They've paid attention to the tactical details and the weapons. And one of the interesting things I didn't mention in Ali Tali was the fact that this film doesn't appear to have any stripper clips in it at all.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, none of the lads were using stripper clips.
Yeah, so the SVT-40 and the Mosin Nagant rifles are clip fed. They're fed by 5-round stripper clips. And if you don't know what a stripper clip is, you open the action of the weapon, there's a little guide, and then you pop the strip into that guide, and then you push with your thumb the bullets or the rounds into the action.
It's the bit of metal that keep the 5 bullets together, don't they? Yeah.
But there's none of those in this film.
No, there's not. No.
Because there's that really interesting little bit where you see the guy with a Mosin on his knee.
Yeah.
And he has the underneath of the magazine open. And he's singly loading in rounds.
Which isn't, I've never seen it done that way. And I've never operated a Mosin that way.
I can only assume that stripper clips hadn't been delivered with their ammo.
I couldn't find anything that did or didn't verify whether they were issued them or not at times.
No, I mean, stripper clips have been a key part of the Mosin Nagant system since it was introduced.
Yeah.
In 1891. So
I mean, I assume that possibly they'd had pouches of stripper clips, and then during that first engagement, they'd used them all up, and they just had boxes of spare rounds.
Possible.
But I don't know how Mosin rounds get delivered, where they get delivered with stripper clips already, like in.
I think so. I think they would have been like it. Yeah.
Bit of a weird one, But it's a small thing, but it did stand out a little bit. It's not inherently wrong.
No, not at all. No, it's just something interesting I noticed.
So for me, I mean, this week, what took me back was just a depiction of infantry knocking out tanks on their own, which was really nice. So the about halfway towards the end of the film, the 45mm tank guns both get knocked out, and you get quite a good heroic scene where the guy's loading it on his own, firing at panzers, taking a couple out, and then he basically gets a cannon shell to the face.
Yeah, he's being Red Army Baskerville, isn't he?
Yeah, oh yeah, massively, yeah. But then after that, all the infantry have to wait for the tanks to come really close because the PTRD is just a pinging off. They're not doing.
Yeah, they occasionally get the lucky track hit, don't they?
Yeah, they hit a track. There's one bit where a guy gets it through the vision slit and his head just comes off, and his co-driver just turns to him, like the radio operator or something, just looks at him and goes, "Oh."
There's a couple of those scenes that are like really visceral. So there's that one where the PTRD round just smashes through the vision slit and decapitates him. And then there's another where a guy outside the tank gets his leg taken off.
It goes through him and then hits the track, doesn't it?
Yes.
Oh yeah,
that's it. Yeah,
that's really.
That
gruesome.
was like, wow, okay.
And then you get a bit where they've knocked out a tank, and the tank crewman's coming out of the side hatch of the Panzer's turret, and he's got an MP40, and the big burly guy you see at the start kicks him back into the tank and throws a Molotov in with a grenade, and then it just explodes. You're like, wow, that's like, amazing.
It is. And, that's the reaction you get because the Germans have been completely dehumanized in this.
Yeah, yeah.
So you're like, oh, wow, Jesus.
Yeah, so you're not thinking people at that point. You're
You're not. You're not.
You sort of get whipped up in that sort of frenzy of the actual troops themselves, is that they're acting so quickly. Maybe they're not even realizing what they're doing. It's just fight or flight.
Survival. And it is a film about survival.
In the film, you don't get bored of seeing the same thing 5 or 6 times because they throw the incendiary bottle onto the tank, make the fire, maybe trying to get some of that liquid flame to seep into the tank somehow. And then you get a guy either getting up close and throwing a grenade into the tank or running up onto it and throwing one into the hatch. But that never gets boring because it's all in different the stakes are different every time.
Yeah, there's variation too, isn't there? So at the beginning, they get up fairly close and the PTRDs are like managing to hold them off about 100 yards. And then they get really close and they are they're throwing grenades and they're taking off the tracks in front of them and then they're hitting them with a Molotov. And in between that, you've got some guys running around, moving the PTRD to different positions, which is really good to see. That's really, quite authentic. And then, there's another scene where the tank actually drives over the trench and a guy throws one of the RPG-40 anti-tank grenades up onto the back of the tank.
That's nice.
I think it's a Mark 3 or 4. I don't know.
Yes.
I think it's a 4 actually. And it, that knocks that tank out and they hit it with a Molotov. And it's just that sort of procedural nature. And that's what they would have been talking, like, knock out the track, hit it with a Molotov or an incendiary bottle. That's the key.
And then I think for my final favourite bit, I don't know if I'm not nicking it from you, it's just the end bit where they're all they're out of ammo. All the faceless German troops are coming up and everyone looks like they're done for. The guys are checking their mags, they're checking their pouches, they haven't got any left, any ammo left. They gear up, they tool themselves up with shovels and knives. And
one guy's got like a little hatchet.
Yeah, which is really accurate. You've seen I know that Russian troops sharpen the end of their shovels to use as weapons. And
it was vicious fighting. I like the bit where they're throwing rocks too.
Oh yeah, they throw rocks. They run out of grenades. They throw rocks. But yeah, so this all looks done for.
One guy that has an MP40 or a 38 at one point.
Yeah,
looks like a 38 actually.
It's a 38, I think.
And there's a bit where one of the officers takes out his TT-33, Tokarev.
He's giving it
firing over the parapet because I think his PPSH is run out of ammo.
Yeah,
that's really that's kind of a bit tropey. We're getting
a
into
little bit
tropey bits. So there's a few tropes. So there's the bit where there's the guy running the anti-tank gun on his own because his crew's been killed.
Yeah. And you always have him doing the bolt, like in all these movies. If there's an action to be done with a weapon, it's always done so laboriously. So he like throws up that bolt and rams it back, puts a thing in. It looks so like, oh, it's so difficult for me on my own, sort of trope, Yeah,
he's fighting hard, Rob.
It's fighting hard. Yeah.
And the bit where the guy, like as you mentioned, gets kicked back into the tank, that's a little bit tropey. The bit where they're getting ready with their bayonets, that's a little bit tropey. The last rounds, like
that's it. Yeah, but I like it because they're all huddled together, and the guys like some guys are holding their like knives in front of them, some guys have it down by their like waist. They're all hyping themselves up.
Yeah,
and then that Maxim opens up again,
which is super tropey.
Yeah, really tropey. Like there's one guy on the last machine gun post they've got, and he absolutely gives it some.
Well, it gets knocked out by a Panzer IV, doesn't it?
That's it.
Just while he's sort of side down the German infantry, and then he carries on firing while staring at the Panzer IV that's aiming at him, which is that's kind of getting into that realm of Russian war movie-ish, kind of like, come on now. But it isn't done with like the same sort of gloss.
No.
So it's kind of forgivable.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Anyway, that gets knocked out, and then out of nowhere at the end, like they're all like going, "Oh God, no, got no ammo left." We're down to like hatchets and bayonets, and then the Germans are right on the edge of the parapet. The soil's falling down the edge of the trench, which is a lovely piece of like cinematography because it's really nicely shot. And then the Maxim opens up on the flank,
and it takes everyone out. But there's one thing we haven't mentioned, and we can't not mention it because it was so odd. Was that Panzer 3 or 4 filling in the trench?
Oh yeah,
like with the dead guys. Yeah, that was really weird, wasn't it?
yeah,
So one of the panzers gets really close, and this is really towards the end. It might be the last 20 odd minutes before the guys sort of start themselves up for hand-to-hand combat.
yeah.
But this panzer is on the trench system, and there's dead Russians there, and it goes left and right on the top to like fill in the trench to like bury the
Yeah.
dead. And I don't know if that actually ever happened.
I think he was trying to like crush anyone that was still hiding there.
Yeah, that's what I thought. But in the movie, it's sort of portrayed as like him filling in the dead bodies or something.
One of the guys is like trying to crawl away from it, isn't he? And the sides are falling in, and it's really nicely shot.
It's nicely shot, but it's a bit odd, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a little bit tropey, and that was something tanks did. They did sort of, when they got to a position they knew that bombs had been thrown from, or that there was a position on it, they'd try and break it up.
Right, I can get that then. Okay.
But they wouldn't have followed someone down the trench.
Yeah, he did follow him, didn't he? Yeah.
He kind of followed him.
It would have benefited from maybe a shot from inside the tank again, and maybe like
like a gem, like the tank commander pointing and being like,
maybe
drive along we'll just roll up them.
Yeah, or like teach these communists a lesson or something. Maybe just one line or something. Maybe just a little bit of context from the Germans would have been nice at least once. So yeah, I think that wraps up favourite scenes for this week. So I think we're into final thoughts territory again. Matt, lead us off.
Surprisingly good. Like, the cinematography was really impressive. We had those nice overhead shots, the tight shots from the bottom of the trench. So there's a really cool shot where the tank has been knocked out over the trench, and you see the guy like crawl underneath after he's thrown a Molotov. It's just these kind of like nicely composed shots, and the use of landscape with some nice dolly shots. Just knowing that it was all practically done and then laid in post was interesting to learn. It wasn't just a CGI tank; it was a model, laid onto the actual landscape. That was impressive. Those nice shots where the rumble of the tank is it's the earth is slipping down, the palisade of the trench. Just really cool, just well acted and pretty well directed as well. The general story isn't trying to do anything cerebral, as I said earlier. It's just basically trying to tell a typical story of a Russian defensive position. Half a dozen of the guys survive. A lot of them get killed, which is exactly what would have what happened. Perhaps not with the 28 men, as we've discussed. That was a little bit too much of a legend, and that's kind of been embraced by the film, I think, where they've taken that on and sort of nodded to it.
Yeah.
And it's more of just a portrayal of the defense of Moscow, basically.
Definitely.
It's a portrayal of that battle more than it is the full legend.
It's just a really good portrayal of a small unit action, and that's its overall strength. And for me, it's the scale of the movie that is. It's like, I wouldn't say saving grace. The movie doesn't need to be saved. It's a really good film, but it's just one of the overall things for me is that I really like the scale. I never felt that one side was being portrayed as overpowered than another. Overall, I thought it was a great little film. I can't knock it. And for an indie production, it's really, really up there.
Yeah. I mean, perhaps the number of tanks knocked out is a little bit, possibly too optimistic.
Maybe,
but, I think you're right. I think it is. I enjoyed it. I think it's a good last stand film, definitely.
And it's available as well to watch. It's on YouTube. The production company that made it put it up. So, this week we're lucky that anyone who wants to go and watch it is available up for free on YouTube to watch, which is really, really nice.
Yeah, I think it's up there in sort of an effort to raise awareness of their next film that they're working on, which is about a lady Soviet pilot.
Yeah, they're working on that, and there's some production footage of that. Looks really good.
Yeah, there's like a little trailer and stuff for that I think they're working on actively right now.
Yeah, we'll definitely follow that up when it comes out, because I think if they're going to do a great job on a ground-based flick, I want to see what they do with an aerial film.
Yeah, I'm just wondering what it'll be like. It'll be probably a bit more reliant on CGI, so
possibly,
which might let it down a little bit. But
they were making Sturmoviks in that.
They were.
In that film, yeah.
I think they'll have some nice like ground shots, attack scene and stuff. So that'll definitely be pretty cool.
We'll keep an eye out for that one. So I think that wraps up for this week again. A great film. If you're into your Eastern Front stuff, I mean, you can do a lot worse. Hit that notification bell or button or whatever it is on the app that you're listening to so you don't miss out. You can also support the pod on Patreon now. So if you go to Fighting on Film on Patreon, just search for it on Google or from the website, fightingonfilm.com.
A few of you guys have been very kind and done so. But you can also support us by letting other people know about the podcast as well.
Definitely.
So if you want to, spread the word to family and friends that might be interested in listening, please do.
Yeah, and we're very grateful for everyone who's pledged on the Patreon so far. We've got some good things coming up this year, and we hope that we can all share them with you. That's it for this week. We'll catch you next time.
Thanks for listening, guys.
Bye.
Bye.